Hello guys, thanks as always for tuning in. Jay Helmsing here. Today I'm going to do a real quick install and overview of the Overwatch Precision DAT or DAT trigger for Glock guns. And I'm going to install this one. This one's made for the 45 or the large frame models. So I'm going to install this one in my Glock 30. But obviously the impressions that I get could carry over to any model that you install this trigger in. So it's just going to be kind of a representative installation and review today on that trigger there. I will kind of walk you guys through what's going on here. So recently picked up this Glock 30. And you guys can watch a review on that. Really like the gun. It is a nice gun. It's a nice carry piece. A lot of good things it's got going for it. However, the one thing I did not care for, other than the sights, which have been switched out, was the trigger itself, the face of the trigger to be more specific. So on the Gen 4 and earlier models, in compact and subcompact, Glock used this serrated or stepped trigger, and as you guys see the face in there, it's just got some steps on it. They're just kind of annoying. They're not anything you can't learn to live with, and it's definitely a serviceable trigger. However, it's just something that none of my other guns have anything like that, and I just kind of notice those ribs as I go to work the gun fairly quickly. And the big thing is I develop a hot spot because the way the trigger works, if you guys can see, it steps all the way up until you get to this little center safety here, this trigger safety, or some people call it the dingus. And that right there, that little rib in the center is basically, as you put your trigger finger in there, that's what all the pressure is kind of resting on, is just that one little piece. So it's not being dispersed over the entire face of the trigger. So what happens, at least with me, is over several hundred or thousand rounds or so, I develop some hot spots and even some blistering on my trigger finger from interface with this this serrated trigger. So my first order of business was to switch it out. And typically when I do that, I just switch it out with like a Glock 21 model, which would be the full-size version of the 45. That's normally what I'd switched out with, just a stock one. They're like 20 bucks or something. And they have the smooth face, just like all your full-size Glocks do. So that's what I was looking to do. However, when I logged on the interwebs, I happened to come across a used Overwatch Precision DAT trigger for the full-size Glocks, for the full-frame Glocks in either 10mm or 45. And it's all set up to go in this gun. Now I just opened this, so it's as you see it here, and it is used. So some of you right now might want to tune out because I can already see the comments, oh, this is not a good review, this is a used part, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, well, take it for what it is, right? So I'll make some comments, but keep in mind this is a used trigger, and I'm going to say just in the general overview, this has been installed. I can tell by some of the wear marks. However, this also does not have any noticeable damage or any marking or anything like that. It's not been used a whole lot, so take it for what it's worth. It is a used part, but we'll just kind of roll with it because obviously I'm self-funding and I don't have all kinds of money to dump into new parts to review and put on my channel here. So we'll make do with what we have, right? So the first thing I'm going to say is that I did notice the anodization on here, and you guys can kind of see that. I don't know when this was made. This could be a very old trigger somebody just had laying around, but the anodization on this piece, and it is an machined aluminum trigger, is it's more of a purplish looking color. It's supposed to be black, but it's more of a purplish looking color, and the actual safety is a darker color black, so there is a bit of a contrast there. Now I don't know if it's just bad anodizing, I don't know if it's just an old part maybe, because I did get it used. However, it doesn't look like it's been abused by any means. I did notice that right away. So the anodization on this one at least is a little bit lighter, and I can't speak for Overwatch Precision if they've changed the process or if this was just kind of a maybe it's a factory second somebody bought. I have no idea, but just overall finish, that's what I noticed. Other things of note, this does have that row bar coating. It's very slick on this trigger bar here, so it's pretty cool. It's supposed to be very low friction, and it's supposed to help with the smooth out the trigger a little bit. So we'll see how that works. And again, I've not even test fit this yet, so it's all going to be live coming up in just a few moments. So we'll kind of see how this goes. But overall machining of the part is just superb. I've had some of these triggers before, not from Overwatch Precision. This is my first Overwatch trigger, but I've had some aftermarket triggers before where you could just kind of feel and hear the spring in there for the safety, kind of making a gritty sound or gritty feel. This is absent of anything like that. I mean, it's got very good range of movement. Again, the trigger safety is just almost sublime. it just kind of works, and it feels very robust. And again, if you've ever installed any of these triggers, or if you're not real familiar with them, you do have to watch these roll pins and ensure that over time, you know, and over the concussion of shooting them, they don't start working their way out, because obviously that could be a snag problem. And you know, some people, when they put these in holsters, that could get snagged, and then you're looking at a real bad day. Hopefully the safety here will keep that from happening, but you know, safety is a mechanical device that can and will fail, right? So keep that in mind. You know, something always to watch if you do install these pins may work their way out, that you may have to center them up from time to time. But again, that's just me kind of talking anecdotally. I have no experience with this trigger yet. So I'm going to keep gabbing to you guys as I tear this gun apart, and we're going to try to do this live on here. And as you guys know, I typically do not do any breaks in my filming, so it's going to be as it turns out, okay? So, and unfortunately I don't have a downward angle camera, so I'll be holding this up from time to time to show you guys what I'm doing. Basically, this is a Glock, and if you've ever taken one apart, you kind of know what's going on. If you haven't, this is going to look like kind of some kind of black art voodoo stuff or something, but I'll kind of tell you what's going on. You got to take these 3 pins out in the frame. Basically all the guts come out at that point, so I'm going to knock those pins out. We're going to go from there. But in doing so, I'll kind of tell you a little bit, you know, my experience with this trigger, and with the 45 Glock overall, I have noticed they do seem to have a bit more robust feeling trigger than a lot of the 9mm or 40 caliber or anything else, the small frame guns. I don't really know what to attribute that to. Obviously, the clearances in there are different. Things are not going to line up like they should or they typically do. On the smaller frame versions, you know, none of the parts really swap over. It's basically the same thing, only wider in these 45 models and 10mm models. But I have noticed overall the triggers in these large frame Glocks seem to be a little bit better than the ones in the small frame Glock. So what I have here is basically the fire control unit, or you know, the trigger assembly out of the Glock at this point. It is lubricated. I did take all this out and clean it, so it does have some you know, lubrication and whatnot. It's also got a whole bunch of carbon from shooting really dirty white box ammo through this gun. But basically that's it, guys. You pop the pins out, pop out your locking block here, and then you can just pop this bad boy here out, and you guys can probably already see where this goes. So it's just going to replace this bar here and this trigger shoe with this bad boy right here. I'm going to get me some towels or rag real quick so I'm not dealing with all kinds of nastiness. But we'll go ahead and switch this out next. So I'm just going to pull this bar out here, and I like to pop. What I do is I always pop the spring back on this side, because if you do that, it's supposed to make an S shape, and that's how I know I've got it in correctly. So I'm going to do that. We'll take my original trigger bar off here, and again I'm going to just kind of get the crud off of it so it doesn't start transferring to everything that I have on my bench here. So we'll lay this aside, and this maybe give you guys a better look at that face. It's like I say, it's a serrated face. I don't really care for it. I know some people can adapt to it and use it, and I'm sure I could, but it just it doesn't mesh well with my hand. It doesn't seem to be a very friendly trigger. So again, that bad boy is out. I've got my unit here. What I'm going to do next is make sure that my spring is oriented correctly, like I was just mentioning. And we're going to go ahead and fit this assembly, this new assembly, up in there. Just snap my spring on. And usually these go right in, but sometimes they can be a little bit tight. This one seems to be a little bit tight, so there we go. Okay, so I got the basic thing in there. Now the next thing I'm going to do is put just a little bit of lubrication on this, because you can kind of get, especially with these Glocks, you can, if you don't lubricate the stuff as you put them in, you can kind of get a little bit of what I like to call a false positive as you put them together. And you know, in all my gunsmithing, and I'm obviously not a paid gunsmith or anything, but of all my gunsmithing experience, I have noticed that you know, if you put something in dry without lubricating it, it's going to give you a different feel than if it has actual lubrication in it. And above anything else, you're going to have a different feel when you start putting rounds down the gun. I don't know if it's just the concussion, if it's the actual, you know, firing process, all the, you know, the violent snap of everything in there, dealing with that stress. But you know, you'll have some of these triggers that come out kind of notchy at first, and as you start putting rounds down, you really start smoothing the trigger out. And it's something that sometimes will clear out under dry fire conditions, but they seem to happen faster with live ammunition. So anyway, throwing that bad boy in there. I'm just kind of seating everything for now. I'll put my locking block in there next to kind of hold stuff in place. And for some reason, that's kind of a loose-fitting Glock locking block. Most of the time, they're a little bit tighter than this one. This one just seems to bloop, drop right down in there. So well, the way I like to do these is I'll typically put this rear pin in next, and I replace this with a metal pin. A lot of those kits will come with metal pins for that rear piece. It's typically a plastic pin back here, but a lot of the you know, the top shooters will say you don't want this control moving at all. You want it to be as solidly stapled in there as possible to get a consistent trigger pull. I don't know if it deflects or not, but that's the theory. So I figure why not? I had a pin laying around, so I threw that metal pin in the back there, but your plastic one will work fine probably. Now the next thing is the order in which these go. I like to put this top pin in next. So I'm going to run this top pin in. And the reason I do that, and I'll center it up real quick, but the reason I do that is because if you don't put the top pin in first and then put in your slide release or slide catch, what happens is, see, this goes underneath this bar here. As you can kind of see that little spring sticking up there, that little wire doodad is going to go right underneath that bar. And then I've just got my one trigger bar spring or pin to install, that little the biggest pin there. But if you don't do it in that order, what I found out is that you go to put the top pin in, and it will sometimes go in behind the spring, that little bail that I just showed you for your slide stop, slide catch, or whatever you want to call it. And it'll bind it up sometimes, and you'll really have some issues, so you have to pull it all apart and then, you know, redo it anyway. So that's the most streamlined way that I have found to do it, is in that order. Top pin first, and then this bottom one here. So I'll kind of tell you guys what's going on, because you don't have eyes on down here. But I'm just kind of working this trigger around a little bit because you're going to have to work both the slide catch up and down, or back and forth, or however it wants to go, and also maybe the trigger back and forth a little bit to get it started. And then it should, just like that, should slide right in. So just kind of play with it. You know, obviously don't be beating the snot out of it, use a lot of force or anything, but it should hit a point where it just is wanting to slide right in, and then you got it. You got the bad boy whip there. So I've got it installed now, but all the pins are back in it, and we'll go ahead and put this slide on. Let me wipe this thing out just a little bit. There's so much crud, so much nastiness in this white box ammo. But you guys probably know that if you shoot a lot, it's just dirty. Man, it's dirty, especially in 45, it's just nasty. I'm used to shooting my hand loads, which come out much cleaner. So I'm just gonna kind of seat everything in there, run the slide a couple times. Obviously check, make sure we're clear there. Check, make sure my mag is clear, because that gives me a little bit of a grip, more of a realistic grip. And let's see what we have here. So initial impression right away is that took out a lot of the take up here. So this take up, I'm gonna try to run it with this finger. It's probably cut in half compared to what it normally is on a Glock. There's a lot more take up than that usually. But that kind of serves as like a safety space or a buffer zone for these triggers. So I'm not a big fan of taking a lot of it out, but especially for a carry gun or something. But it did reduce that take up quite a bit just by changing the geometry with this trigger face. So go ahead and do some pulls with it and see what I think. I can tell you already, the weight of the pull did not change, probably at all. So the weight of the pull still feels to be around that 6-pound mark, which is where it should be. And like I say, it has a stock connector, stock dot connector, as these Gen 4s come with. And it also has a stock bar on this Overwatch Precision trigger, but it is much, much more crisp. It hits that wall, and then there's just a little bit of deflection feeling, and then it breaks. So it is a much nicer feel with this bar in it. It's a little more, it's just more precise feeling. And again, this is going to need to be shot and really kind of broken in and worn into the gun, but it does have a very nice crisp you know, break in it. So there is a noticeable difference just in that. So I'll kind of show you guys here. I don't know that the reset's any less. Reset's usually pretty good on Glocks anyway, but there you go. There's a reset. and then you're back into it. It's a very nice feeling trigger, very serviceable. And again, I don't notice like a huge difference. I mean, there might be a little reduction in reset take up, but I really like how it's breaking very crisp now. I just had a mushy feeling with that stock bar in there before, and again, probably would have came out over time shooting it. Big thing that I wanted to do was change the face of this trigger, and that definitely did that. It's a little bit slick, a little bit on the slick side, especially being a flat face trigger. So my finger does kind of slide on it just a little bit, especially with the nasty oil and stuff from taking all those parts out. But it is much nicer feeling. It feels, you know, definitely like you could shoot it all day and not have any, you know, not hurt your precious little fingers, which I really don't care about. But you know, why shoot a gun that's going to give you a blister if you don't have to, right? So overall, I'm happy. I don't know, you know, how I'd feel if I paid full tilt for this. You know, because they're, you know, around 130 some dollars maybe. Last I checked. I don't know how I'd feel if I was in that bucket, but buying it used for the price that I got it for, I'm pretty stoked, I gotta tell you. I think it's gonna be a good trigger. There's no notchiness. It's very clean feeling trigger. Very clean take up. And again, just kind of the typical Glock notchiness, but I do have the stock connector. It's got the stock bar in there and so forth. But I feel like the coating probably did help a little bit, just kind of smoothing everything out. You know, pretty low friction. And again, that take up is definitely reduced. The take up here is definitely reduced, and the break is much more crisp, and the reset maybe a hair less, maybe just a little hair less, because it also is going to be affected by that geometry of this trigger. So overall, very cool. I'm going to go put some rounds in this bad boy. And again, I don't really care how my guns look. You guys can kind of see that contrast there where it's more of a purplish color than a black. It just looks like kind of old or worn anodizing or something, but I don't care. I don't really care how it looks. Some people put these triggers in just because they like how they look and all. I'm not that. I don't care. I'm very Spartan in those terms. As long as it functions, and it functions every time, and it does what I need it to, we're good to go. So obviously you get those looks if you want them. If not, you don't have to have them or anything, but there you go. That's the DAT or DAT trigger, and the TAC trigger, which they also offer. The difference with the TAC trigger, it's the same exact setup. It just has a little kick out here on the end, so it just kind of curves forward, and that may help mitigate some of that slippy, you know, slidey feeling that I'm talking about feeling as I hit this trigger face. That would provide, you know, a little catch down there to kind of rest your finger as it rolls down the trigger. But overall, very cool, very nice trigger. I'm really looking forward to getting some rounds in this now and kind of doing a little follow-up report after I get it out to the range. But I thank you guys for tuning in and watching, and I'm going to be doing more of these product reviews and things like that as I get them and as I start feeling them and using them myself. So again, I appreciate your viewership. I appreciate you tuning in. Don't just take my opinion for these things. Obviously, get a big base, you know, look at what other people say, read some reviews and things like that before you make your purchasing decisions. But I just noticed a pretty big lack of information out there on these Overwatch triggers. You know, people just kind of put them in and they run with them and that sort of thing. So I wanted to put this out there for you guys. You know, keep going to the range, keep doing your research, keep shooting, keep practicing and developing, and I will see you guys next time. Thanks again for tuning in.